Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Carl. Jim.
George.
Bill.
Patrick.
Nicholas.
Carl.
Snake.
Mark.
Kevin. Peter.
Bill.
Michael.
Hardy.
Buzz.
David.
Harv.
Paul.
Peter. I'm Steve.
Jack.
Flint.
Christian. David.
Marcus.
No. Terry.
Anyone here for the first time? Welcome. We're delighted to have back our friend Christian Huerta, who is the founder of Q Spirit and the author of Coming Out Spiritually, and is active nationally, leading workshops and retreats, empowering the queer community to a greater confluence of spirituality and sexuality. Is that correct?
Sure.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I hope so, anyway. So, hi. Great to be here, to be back here. And when Clint approached me a couple of months ago to invite me to speak again here, and we decided that sexuality and spirituality would be a good topic to revisit for many of us. I had a thought. I remembered that when I was in 1989, when I first met my former spiritual teacher, my former guru, in the middle of this weekend intensive, at one of the first breaks, it was such an eye-opening and heart-opening experience for me. And at one of the first breaks, I just bolted down and I spoke, and I asked her to speak with her for a minute. The first question that came out of my mouth was, do I have to give up sex in order to become enlightened? It's a question that is still with me. And recently, not only to prepare for this, but I was reading this, What is Enlightenment magazine? Do you know it's a great magazine by Andrew Cohen. And this particular issue, which you can get back issues of online, it's what is the relationship between sex and spirituality? And they have the whole gamut of advocates of Tantra to monastics from different traditions, including Christianity and Buddhism, of course. And so it struck me again, just the whole variance of those people who advocate that we can experience the divine through sex, and those other people and traditions who think that we have to forego that in order to become really enlightened. And I'm not a formal Buddhist, so I know that's sort of a disclaimer here in case I say anything that might be viewed as heretical, if there's such a thing as heresy in Buddhism. But I'm very philosophically compatible, and my meditation practice is definitely Buddhist, and I have a great love for not only the Buddha, but for the tradition. And I don't belong to any one particular tradition. I'm fed by many. But through the practices of Buddhism and the philosophy of Buddhism, I have definitely tasted the aspect of the divine that is that beautiful stillness, the part of perfect stillness, which to me is definitely a part of the divine. Exquisitely so. But where Buddhism hasn't supported me personally is like, what do I do with my passion? And I don't mean only sexual passion, just passion in general. And I was struck by one of the Buddhist teachings in this magazine, which I'm sure you've all heard before. But it struck me as sex negative, to say the least. It's the quote that I'm sure from the life of the Buddha, which says, "Misguided man, if it were better for you that your member should enter the mouth of a hideous, venomous viper than that it should enter a woman." it were better for you that your members should enter a pit of coals, burning, blazing, and glowing, than that it should enter a woman. Which, of course, leaves, the whole realm of possibility for us as gay men. But I'm assuming he meant it for anybody, regardless of gender. So it's like, God, what do I do with that in my own life? And like I say, I'm still sort of struggling with this. It's an ongoing question for me. At the same time that I've tasted the divine in that perfect stillness, I've also tasted the divine in the heat of passion, in full sexual experience, in which the dividing, the ego borders, the temporary that keep us separate, were totally collapsed. And my partner and I became one. And last night, for an example, the last couple of days I was sort of on and off. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it today. I was fighting the last remnants of a cold that I picked up on the East Coast. I was there for a week, and when I left in New York on Wednesday, it was minus 11. So let's see. I get a little, and I'm also, there's shit up in my life, so to speak. So it was a little touch and go there for a while. And so last night, my partner Marcus is here today, and we were getting ready to go to bed and all, and I was already kind of late, and I thought I was already kind of preoccupied about today, and my sister's coming in today to stay with us, so that was in my mind, and very wisely and very generously, he, let's say, seduced me, and we proceeded to have an amazing experience of transcendence, where the borders between he and I totally fell away, and it was the divine making love to the divine, and so I have that experience so I can't write off that experience either. So how do we be? There's in the Western tradition specifically, and definitely since most of the patriarchal religions, we've had this whole schism between the divine, whatever was considered the divine, the sacred, and whatever was considered the physical. And anything that was considered divine or sacred was, placed way outside of our realm. Where the hell is heaven anyway? And how much further could we have placed it? And anything that was of the physical was made something lower, something to be controlled and conquered and subjugated, and evidenced by what we're doing to our planet, but also the body. And anything of the physical, and in particular, the sexual organs were made something that were made wrong and sinful, and in many cases even demonized. And so, what do we do with that? When at the same time we know there are other traditions, some other Eastern traditions, the Tantric and Taoist traditions, where that schism didn't exist. Where sexuality was actually considered a very valid path to divine union. And also in the indigenous traditions, that physical, spiritual schism did not exist. In their philosophy, their worldviews, everything is considered sacred, including the clouds and the rivers and the animals and the sexual organs. So what do we do with that? How do we begin to bridge that schism in each of our lives? And I'm certainly still in this question for myself, but here are some of the things that I've come up with that I wanted to share with you today. To support us in bridging that schism. One of them is going within, which every tradition, if you look at the core teachings of all traditions, they're all in one way or another are talking about the importance of going within. And of course, in Buddhism, and we don't even need to talk about that, the whole purpose of meditation is to teach us to do that, to quiet the mind so that we can access that deeper heart of perfect stillness. Ideally, anyway. And so, and even the founding patriarchs of ancient Greece, they spoke about the importance of know thyself. And even in the Christian traditions that many of us were raised in, Jesus was said to have said, the kingdom of God is within. And so all of them, in one way or another, in a point towards that. And I think that it's so important, and I know that I preach to the choir here, but that we develop the practices, and that we take the time in our daily lives, not just on Sundays, to do that. Because as we deepen our understanding of ourselves, our knowledge of ourselves, then we can really begin to develop that self-love. And until we develop that deep self-love, as far as I'm concerned, it's impossible to really love another being. Another thing that I think is helpful for me in bridging that separation between sex and spirit, it's reminding myself about this body, about this vehicle that keeps me here in this realm, which has been so demonized and made wrong in so many traditions. And so many traditions, in fact, speak about the body being a temple. And if we look at the ancient Greek origin of that word, it comes from temenos, which means something that contains within it the divine essence, the divine presence. And so when I think of it in those terms, it definitely makes me think. I become more mindful about what I put into my body, and also the situations that I place my body in. And very clearly, let me say that this is not about right or wrong, or any moral judgment here. As far as I'm concerned, when it comes to sexuality, as long as between two or more consulting adults, and no one is getting harmed, I'm just like, anything goes. So I'm certainly not here to decide what's right or wrong for anyone else. But what I have found helpful for me to decide what is right for me, and what are those situations that are appropriate for me in the sexual arena, is a question that I ask myself, which is, how do I feel afterwards? And so many times in my life, in the past especially, there were many times where I would engage in an anonymous sexual encounter, where after the fact, I would come out of it feeling just empty, and feeling like, my God, it's like, or something. And this is after I got rid of the Catholic guilt, so it wasn't that, which I can definitely know what that feels like. So, but beyond the Catholic guilt, there were times where I would have that kind of just sex for the sake of sex. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong for sex for sport. I think sex is great. I love sex. But oftentimes I would feel leaving emptier than I did before. And what I realize is, like what so many teachers talk about, is that oftentimes when we engage in sex, what we really want, what we really long for, is a much deeper connection. Is a soul level connection, which you could say, it's what we long for whenever we do drugs or sex, or when we eat that pint of Ben and Jerry's, is that we're really longing to fill that gap, that hole that's inside of us, which is a longing for divine reunion. So be that as it may, that's a question that I have found helpful for me, is how do I feel afterwards? And is that activity, or is that experience, is that relationship, is that whatever, is it making me a stronger, more compassionate, more generous, more loving person? So those are the two questions that I've come up to ask myself in determining what is right and appropriate for me. Another thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of sex and spirit is that we all know that not everyone in this room has the genetic makeup of a Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt or whoever it is that that we fetishize about. But at the same time, we all know people who could be on the cover of a fashion magazine, that after 5 minutes of talking with them, it's like, my God, next. And it's like, there's nothing there, much of substance, that would engage me. And there isn't even after a while a sexual attraction, even though this person could be beautiful. It could be on a magazine. At the same time, we also know that there are people who would never be found on the cover of one of those magazines, yet there's something about them. There's some inexplicable but palpable, almost a magnetic animal energy that, even though they might not be objectively my type, there is something about them that it's so intriguing and magnetic that I would just makes me want to jump in bed with them. And what I've come to decide about what that is somebody who has a deep knowledge and understanding of themselves, and somebody also who's going for it in whatever way that expresses itself in their life. Somebody who's going for their own personal excellence, their own personal expression, in their own case, whatever that may be. whether it's writing an Oscar-winning screenplay or whether it's making the best chocolate brownies this side of the Mississippi. Somebody who's tapped into that deeper part of themselves and is expressing that no matter what other people think of them or think they should be doing with their life. And I find that incredibly sexy. And the reason that I bring that up is because oftentimes we sort of let ourselves off the hook in saying, it's like, well, I can't do this or that because I'm not, I couldn't be able to cover that magazine or my body is overweight or whatever it is. But when we think about it in this way, no one's off the hook. No one is off the hook. We all have that unique potential that makes each one of us unique. But there's no other person in this planet or the universe or any other universe that has the same combination of genetics and experiences that make each one of us the unique human beings that we are. So, to me, that's our universal imperative, is to express that. Because if we don't, who will? And that's really, really sexy to me. The other thing that I want to talk about, too, in terms of sex and spirit is a concept that I got from a physicist who teaches here at CIIS by the name of Brian Swim. Cosmologist, mathematician, physicist, wrote a book called The Universe is a Green Dragon, as well as The Universe Story is a different book, more sort of academic. Great book, easy to read, highly recommended. And what he's done is he's taken principles that govern the cosmos and applied them to the human experience, because contrary to what some people on this planet believe, or at least live as, is like we're part of the cosmos. So of course we're going to be governed by some of these same principles and rules. So one of them that he talks about is cosmic generosity. And he uses the example of a supernova. That when a supernova explodes, and in a sense gives up its life, gives up its form, in that ultimate act of generosity, what happens? Stars and suns and moons and planets and solar systems are born out of that act of generosity. And life occurs. And so what he talks about is how physicists tell us, and these aren't pretty poetic words, this is scientific fact, that we're made of, our bodies are made of the same elements. 99 point something percent of the elements in our bodies are the same elements that are found in the stars. So that when he talks about this cosmic generosity, he says that we too have that cosmic generosity. That we too have that desire inside of us to give ourselves away. So, applying that to the sexual experience, when I think of it, is when I'm with my partner, or partners of whoever I'm with, that I bring that sense of cosmic generosity to that experience, that I consciously think about it. Like, this is the divine in me making love to the divine in him. So that it's almost like the divine making love to itself, recognizing itself. And so, if when I think of it in that way, it's like, how could I not give myself totally to that? And in that sense, I could say that even that God or the divine is in the blowjob, which is another thing that sort of bothers me about some of these religions that talk about how God is everywhere. But so of course God is going to be everywhere except for sex and the sexual organs. It's like, come on, and it's either everywhere or it's not. So anyway, got all sidetracked there. So that sense of giving myself, of just giving myself, holding nothing back, whether I'm going down on him or whatever it is, just giving myself as if I were making love to the divine itself. And if we remember that, and sometimes, I'm fortunate that I'm in a relationship where I can do that, and we talk about it, and we ritualize our sex and our lovemaking. But I don't even think that's necessary. I think that even as a unilateral choice, that if we bring that intent, that consciousness, that decision to bring that into our lovemaking, what a difference that'll make in our experience. Even if we thought about it for 2 seconds before we engaged in the act of sex. I want to wrap it up soon so that we can begin to dialogue a little bit. I guess the last thing that I'll say for now about this area is that, to me, the cutting edge of sex is not horizontal. is not in numbers of partners. And I know that I'm not the only person in this room who has had multiple partners and who has maybe even maxed out on those partners. And so when I think about that, and again, this is not a right or wrong or establishing a hierarchy of sexual expression at all. I'm just talking about my personal experience that I think that when sex remains at the purely just physical, getting my rocks off kind of thing, that when it's how many more can I get? How many more partners will it take? Will it be another 50, 500, 5,000? For us to discover that at that level, probably sex is not going to be ultimately fulfilling, and that in some ways that's the level where it engenders the addictiveness, which we also know as part of the sexual experience. We've also lived long enough in this room to know that sex can be an incredible distraction from our spiritual process, and that it can capture so much of our attention. At the same time that it's so incredibly, indescribably magical and pleasurable. So to me, the cutting edge of sex is more in this direction, in the vertical direction. It's like how high and how deep can I take that experience? And when I think of it in those terms, it's really limitless. And when I think about making love, to me, literally, it means that. It means that this body is literally the vehicle for that divine energy, for the sacred energy of love, the universal power of love, to penetrate consciously into this realm, into this universe. So when I talk about making love, I mean that very literally. And to me, that's the best secret of being a good lover, is to let it be about love, whether it's with a stranger or not. To let that element of love be present. And regardless of what your sexual expression is, or how it is that you're expressing yourself in that area, if you're leaving the intimacy and the love aspect out of it, then my God, you're missing on so much. You're missing on what to me is the best and the juiciest part. And so I'm not saying do this, don't do that. I'm just saying expand our sexual repertoire. Let's try different things. Let's explore. Let's be playful. Even have a sense of lightness about all this. And think about the word enlightenment, where you could say that in a sense it means to become lighter, to let things be more light and lighter. So let's bring also a sense of fun and exploration and adventure and lightness into our sexuality. So why don't we open it up now for some of your comments and questions, whatever.
I've considered many of the things you've said, and they seem. I'm at a point in my life where I'm imagining what true intimacy might be. Most of my record has been pretty, kind of mostly pretty impersonal contacts, and those that I have had have been kind of iffy at best. And so my take on, I guess my question to you was was there some point in your spiritual practice, in your daily spiritual practice, was there something that you started to do differently in that affected or influenced how you perceived your own sexuality and how you chose, it in a sense made you aware of your sexual choices? You know what I mean? So is there somewhere developmentally you noticed a significant kind of change, and could you tell me perhaps what you believe precipitated that change in your self-perception?
That's a great question. And if I had to pinpoint one place where that began was, I would have to say when I was 18, 19, I fell in love the first time. And by this stage, I'd had countless partners. I couldn't tell you how many guys I slept with as a teenager. I was sort of precocious in that way. I had way more partners before 18 than I've had since then, in terms of numbers. But when I fell in love, and because all throughout this time I was very, very Catholic, one of 9 kids. Further evidence that the Vatican roulette doesn't work very effectively. But so my adolescence was really one long depression because I was so sexually active, and yet I grew up believing that having sex and certainly being gay was a mortal sin. And for those of you who, I don't know if many of you know the Catholic theology, but mortal sin, there's different kinds of sin. There's a venial sin, which is sort of all right. A mortal sin means that if you die and you haven't confessed a mortal sin, not only confessed it, but you need to receive the absolution and forgiveness from a priest. This can't be done directly. That means that you go to hell for eternity. And I'm Cuban originally, and I remember being very, very young and asking a priest how long eternity was. And being from an island, he used a very appropriate metaphor, and he said, well, imagine you're going to go to the beach and you take a thimble with you, and you start taking water out of the ocean. Well, that's eternity, which, of course, terrified me. Because, just to put things in context, masturbation is still considered a mortal sin. So not to mention the unmentionable that I was really worried about. So my adolescence was probably like one long depression with suicidal fantasies, and probably the only reason I didn't take my life, other than I didn't want to hurt my family, was that it was a worse sin. So I guess that's something to be said for the concept of sin. But anyway, when I fell in love for the first time, I'll never forget that moment. Because in the first kiss, we hadn't even made love yet. I knew in that moment that being gay wasn't wrong, and I knew that it wasn't sinful, and I knew that it wasn't an illness, and I knew that it wasn't an abomination, and I knew from that moment on that it was just something so beautiful that from that day there wasn't a priest or a minister or a rabbi or an imam or a pope or a psychiatrist on this earth, and my dad was a shrink, who could tell me otherwise. It just became part of my cellular makeup. And so if I had to, and that moment for me was, I used the metaphor that it was as if I had been eating hamburger, and probably hot dog is a more appropriate metaphor, all my life, and then suddenly somebody gave me a filet mignon. And for a vegetarian it's a weird metaphor, but it works. And it's just that in that moment my relationship to sex changed. And it wasn't that I didn't, I mean, of course I've had, sex with strangers, people that I didn't know since that time. But I knew what I wanted. And by the way, I've had experiences that I'm sure many of us have of making love to a stranger. One night. And never saw him again. And yet I know that I made love with that person. So this is not necessarily about an intimate, committed relationship. That's not what I'm talking about. Even though this type of intimacy and expression of love, of course, works better in a safe container with somebody that you trust and somebody that you feel safe with, and somebody, that in our case, that we're both committed to our own individual growth and to the growth of the other, even above the relationship. So that if at any time either one of us felt that the relationship was interfering with our spiritual growth, we would walk away from it. I have no doubt about that in either one of our cases. Or whether it was interfering with the other person's growth.
So in a sense what you're saying is that you got a glimpse of this other quality of experience. Yeah. And then that, in a sense, inspired whatever paths you chose to take. Yeah. So it's a matter of being open to that influence.
Yeah. Well, in my case, it was yes. In my case, it was before I had the whole schism between sex and love. I didn't know that you could combine the two. And it's interesting that, because of the heterosexist culture in which we're all raised, growing up, all my romantic fantasies were about women, because that's how we were acculturated. The movies, the songs, the poetry, the literature, it's all about heterosexual love. So those were my fantasies. But my sexual fantasies were all about guys. And when I fell in love for the first time, it's like, those two became one. And I didn't have that schism, that separation between those two.
The term I use is I have a heart connection with somebody. And I don't know what that even exactly means, except that, I don't have a partner, and I do have anonymous or whatever, casual sex. I either have that heart connection or I don't. And when I was younger, I I didn't have to have that heart connection to have sex with somebody. And as I guess it's old age, I don't know what, or maybe spiritual growth. I need that for the sex to really be a happy occasion. And it's funny how, and you can't make that happen. I mean, and I still have sex with people that I don't have a heart connection. But I noticed that, and then it's really actually amazing when that happens. And it's some kind of chemistry, and I just call it heart connection. But I don't really understand it.
I mean, before I had meditative practice, I know exactly what you're talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Before I had I knew meditation practices like meditation or rebirthing, conscious yogic breathing. The only thing that could stop the chattering of my mind was sex, and not even, and it had to be like making love kind of sex. It had to be something that 2 hours passed, 3 hours passed, and then boom, oh my God, how much time had passed? I had no awareness. I had become timeless. That the ego boundaries had again collapsed, and time went out the window.
I was reading in Matthew Fox recently. He talks about, he sort of draws a contrast between what he calls creation spirituality, which is sort of celebrating God in all things, which seems sort of along the lines of what you're talking about, and then the more sort of ascetic or patriarchal or via negativa kind of traditions. And I find that the distinctions that you're drawing very useful, but I wonder about the whole dualism that's inherent in that way of looking at things. One of the things that Buddhism talks about over and over again is trying not to break things into two, not to have always opposites struggling against each other, but somehow to unify. Can you talk a little bit about your sense of how sexuality and spirituality evolve within the existing traditions? I mean, is it a matter of embracing something non-traditional as a response to the limitations of traditional spirituality, or is the way for people to evolve within their traditions, or what's your sense of what's going on at this point? Is it dialectical, or is it some kind of evolution, or is it some kind of growing together? What?
Well, I think part of it is definitely evolutionary. I think we're coming out of thousands of years of a patriarchal, mostly patriarchal cultures and religions, in which the body and women and the feminine, the more passionate aspect of the divine, were squashed, and and I think we're at the brink of that, and I think it's incredibly important and significant time in the evolution of humanity. And if I were going to say that's one significant thing, what's the single most important thing that needs to happen in terms of our human evolution? I think it would be the empowerment of women. Not to return to a place where there's another matriarchy that that would oppress men, but to a place where we're in equal balance and equal power. And I think that also begins in here, sort of like as above, so below, as inside, so outside. And so that we need to strive for that balance in each of us, and that's, I think that's where I'm sort of, even though it sounds like a dualism thing, but in a way, it's almost like at least I have to be with two heads. You don't have to have two heads about it. It's like I know, on this hand, I know that that sexuality can definitely be a distraction. I know that in my own case, and that it can, that I can obsess about it and all of that stuff, and so that it can be a deterrent for my spiritual growth. And yet, and I know that when I go to that place of perfect stillness, that ecstatic, just place of no movement, of meditation, that I know that there's no body. That's almost like transcending the body and the emotions and desire and all of that. I know that. And at the same time, I can't deny all those other experiences where I'm in my body and I'm reveling in being in a body and delighting in being in a body and just giving myself 100% to the act of sex. And tasting the divine through it. Definitely. I can't deny that either. So maybe maybe it's it's just like the yin yang, like the tai chi, like like both, like you contain both, and maybe one is more like the stillness is more the masculine aspect of the divine, and the other embodied, delightful, sensual, sexual experience is more the feminine expression of the divine. At least that's what I'm going for, kind of striving for a balance of the two.
As an older man, I do know that when I was young, I thought sex was real, and I thought that it was about as real as anything that I could do. And if I wanted to escape impermanence, the approach to orgasm and orgasm were about as real as anything that I knew of. At that moment, everything just seemed absolutely real. But I know that in my case, time is taken care of, and my erections certainly aren't what they used to be. Although I can have numerous orgasms, they are dry orgasms. My ejaculations aren't what they used to be. And it's much kinder. I'm much kinder with myself. It's more of an act of grace. It's also true if you have high cholesterol and take Lipitor or something like that, or some of the others, it reduces your desire. So it's much softer, it's much gentler. And I find there's a quality of love that's entered my life. I'm not after sex, but I love men, and I love to love them. And I find that with my older friends, we're not hot for each other. There's just this quality of love and softness and wonder that comes into our life that we never could have approached years ago. So there's some advantage to that, to seeing how impermanent sex really is, whatever we think. It does not have inherent establishment, as the Dalai Lama says so often. It's just, it's only relatively real. It's in the world of duality. And it's much more fun to love people that's really true, without feeling any pressure to get it on or get it off or something like that. So at the bottom of that, I signed NT.
Thank you.
What I was thinking about was, in some of the writings I've encountered on monastic life, the Catholic and Buddhist kind of monastic, well, in particular, because I think maybe Catholics have varying degrees of success there, but the Buddhist was, some of the readings I've understood is that even people that do lead monastic lives but still have like a lot of fantasies about sexual are still attached. So the resolution that I kind of, for myself, have kind of thought about relative to all of this is not so much, the act as much as the attachment to it. And that kind of segues kind of with what you were saying, and also what I heard you say before about loving yourself first and knowing yourself, and that the way I kind of like resolve it, I guess, is to kind of approach it without like having a real attachment or expectation or like looking for it to kind of fulfill something that might be missing in my life. But that brings to me a second question. I was kind of your thoughts on that, but kind of a second question is the story that you conveyed before about when you were 18 and the first time that you fell in love. I think it's certainly true for myself and possibly other people, friends that have talked to you about this, is the idea about like how you kind of go from like feeling like you're missing something, and then you go out and try to have sex and try to fulfill things with sometimes sex, sometimes other things too, any kinds of things that we kind of like try to fulfill things in our lives. Is in the story you conveyed, you were coming from like a very, very unhappy portion in your life, and thoughts of suicide sounds like very unhappy with yourself, and then how you bridged from this extremely low point to the point of like realizing love, which to me is not something external that's filling in a point, that's something you find within yourself. Right? How do we bridge that? What are your thoughts on that?
What's the question exactly?
I guess, my thoughts are, for me, is the solution is around lack of attachment. And the idea of like finding something within yourself first and not being so attached to the idea of sex or sexual contact with people who's trying to fulfill something that's missing within ourselves, but basically more of kind of an experience of our own, experience of life, not something that we're trying to fulfill outside. And in the story you conveyed, you said that it was from a very low point in your life that you all of a sudden realized you love for the first time. How do we bridge that from like making the connection or the separation between having things that are missing in our lives, but yet trying to find things within ourselves through lovemaking or connection with other people?
Yes. I think the answer is again going within. Through whatever methods or practices you've been led to and you're attracted to, whether meditation or ecstatic dancing, communing with nature, more formal prayer, whatever it is in your case. I think you said it. That's why I said yes. I think the answers are within, the connections within, the love is within, the healing's within. And so whatever we can do to access that, that's the way to go. Sorry if that was answered more clearly, but I think you answered it.
I know Christian, when you talked previously, you talked about your work with Soul Force, which people don't know is a gay Christian group that goes out actively engages the fundamentalist Christians. And this is such a hot topic with I guess with the evangelical Christians in particular about denying the humanity of gay people primarily because of their sexuality. And I guess my question is, do you still work with the evangelical Christian communities? Do you still have dialogue with them and try to get some kind of communication going and insight?
Well, we're friends with Mel White and Soul Force, and we went to their first Pride celebration they had in Lynchburg. And you probably know that Mel and his partner left their house in Laguna and moved into Lynchburg, literally to a house literally across the street from Thomas Street Baptist Church. So they're right there. So you have to go to the building, you see their house. And so we support that. Even though I don't, even though I have my stuff and my perceptions of some of those religions, and the way that in my opinion that they have misconstrued the teachings of Jesus and misapplied them and taken them out of context, and so don't get me going on that, but we'll let that be enough for now. Thank you. But I still support, the efforts of people in our community who are trying to make a space for themselves within those traditions. So I support that. And when I speak at colleges and universities, this last summer I spoke at Ole Miss to a group of like 200 resident assistants who were like mandated to be there. And for out of all the universities I've spoken at, that was the first time that I actually had a passing thought. I was like, oh, should I get a security guard to go out to the car? And I did, and everything was fine. But it was the first time that I had that momentary doubt. Because they got riled up. I pushed some major buttons. And this is like the buckle of the Bible belt, probably. And all I was doing was like asking questions to support them, to question their beliefs, some of their beliefs. And the defensiveness and the threat was it was aggressive. It was intense. So I guess it's a long way of saying that yes, I still do some work. I don't, it's not the focus of my work, but I still do some of that. And lately, I'm actually working on a presentation now, sort of a multimedia kind of lecture / presentation about religious diversity and I'm feeling called to sort of begin to call some of the religions on their shit, so that we can stop killing each other in the name of God. So that's sort of what I'm working on now, developing that. Hey, Roger.
Yes. My latest thinking in this area, which seems to become one of my major research projects in my retirement, is that the traditions that are afraid of sexuality and spirituality, which appear to be certain segments of Christianity, Buddhism, and certain forms of the Hindu tradition, they seem to have a model of sexuality as intrinsically addictive. So I'm glad that you brought up the question of addiction at the end there, because I think with sex, as with alcohol and certain drugs, if we use any of these things, we should watch to see what happens and see if we are becoming addicted or not. And we may not. Most people, for instance, who drink alcohol don't become addicted to it. Some do, and then certain steps have to be taken when that happens. So it's a puzzle to me why certain traditions seem to see sex as intrinsically addictive. But in the Buddhist tradition and certain forms of the Hindu tradition also, not so much in the Christian tradition, alcohol is also seen as intrinsically addictive to everyone who tries it. So one of the 5 precepts in Buddhism is not to drink alcohol at all, because you'll get trapped in it. And one of the other 5 precepts is in regard to sex. So I don't have any answer to this now. It's part of the leading edge of my research at the moment. I seem to have noticed this, and I don't know why it is, but I think that the lesson we can take from it is not to take the official teaching too seriously, and I suppose once again we're preaching to the choir, as you say, but to watch what happens when we get involved in this, and to be honest with ourselves, is it really ennobling and expanding, or is it becoming addictive, which means that it becomes something that is at the edges of life, moves to the center of life, becomes more and more important with increasing contact, with decreasing satisfaction, and the rest of my life is effective.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful.
I was reminded of a friend who goes to the same silent meditation retreats that I do. Our manager, when he said, it'd be so much easier if I could just give everyone a blowjob right at the start. And I could really settle down and meditate. And
Where is this?
Well, you wonder if we could work something out, meditation, walking meditation.
Did you say that was someone else, and those were your ideas?
But I knew exactly what.
Yeah, a friend.
Because the energy that is aroused in meditation can move into sexual expression very powerfully, in my experience. One of the things I love about being a facilitator is to be able to look around and watch people meditate, because everyone is absolutely gorgeous. And I could move around on my knees, just service everyone. But this is how I experience the confluence in my life, and the kissing can be, a deep horizon of meditation, and not to mention other things, and you just wonder about that, the power of the physical posture of being on your knees, Is that a form of prayer, giving a blowjob? These things are very curious to me. The power of the posture, it's very mysterious to me. I just thought...
What's the date for the next?
it is a wild ride, watching the different hormonal levels affect her relationship with sexuality. Because she says, there's some days when I can't remember ever having had sex in my life. It is gone. It is over. It never happened. And then other days it spikes, and she sort of, why am I still invisible? But our bodies have, a large part to play in this, and I don't know, it's just sort of, it's getting more amusing than troubling. But it's, I have no point to make.
Well, I think you make a great point. And what came up for me when you were speaking was like, in Hinduism, the Kundalini energy, which resides, as you know, at the base of the spine, and when it's triggered, it rises up the spine, and that's when the higher chakras or energy centers open, and that's when enlightenment begins to occur. But the Kundalini energy is the sexual energy and the spiritual energy. It's both. So
same energy.
Yeah. So when you're talking about sitting in meditation and having it become sexualized, it's like, yeah, of course. Of course.
I might have mentioned it before in this topic, but Tommy G, who's a spiritual teacher up in Berlin, has this tape on sexuality and spirituality. And I was thinking about it when Jim just gave a share, and she talks about how powerful, she really makes a case of how powerful sexual energy is, which I found very liberating. It's like to recognize it's very powerful. And the real joy, is being able to have sex, to be able to experience this sexual energy, she says, without repressing it, without acting out on it. And that middle path is going to be different for everybody. But it was very liberating because sometimes I would always act out when I felt horny. I mean, I really went through, I still am in a fellowship in sexual addiction. And it was so liberating to realize that I really didn't have to do that because I couldn't do it with the Catholic construct. For 11 years I was in that goddamn fellowship before I heard this tape and it just flipped me over. This is very, it's experiencing, it's not the highest, when I'm body surfing, I think that's as powerful to me as sex. It's so fucking thrilling. And that energy is divine too, and I really have to be attached not to go, when I'm riding the wave, not to just, keep going until I'm so tired I'm going to drown, because I want that one wave that's going to be so fucking thrilling, and the best one I ever had. And so that goes with what Jim said, I wouldn't necessarily, if I felt completely turned on at a retreat, feel compelled to act. If I could sit with that energy, it is so thrilling. It's so thrilling.
Two things came to mind as we were speaking. One was, for those people who doubt that there's a nexus between sexuality and spirituality, the question I have is like, whose name is invoked more commonly at that point of orgasm? And then the other thing that I don't know what you said that triggered this thought, but it's about celibacy. And when I was when I met my first spiritual teacher, I was Jonah Nashram for 5 years. And the first year was complete celibacy. I mean, complete, like not even anything. And if you would have told me that I was going to do that, I would have laughed. Because since from age 10 to 30, I had at least one orgasm a day, and it's often more. And yet I went for a whole year with complete celibacy. And it was a very empowering experience. Incredibly empowering, because what I realized was that growing up as a teenager, as a pained teenager, there were two things that I knew that I liked about myself. That I knew I was smart, because I was a 4.0 student, and I knew that I turned people on. I knew that people, regardless of gender, turned on to me. And so for me to take a whole year where I backed off from that, where I began to just be with my sexual energy rather than project it and attach it and act it out, it was incredibly empowering. It was a very, very powerful experience. It was almost like learning to relate to the world and to people in a different way. And it was learning to sort of be with what you're talking about, be with that sexual energy, and sort of it allowed me to be more a master of it rather than be at its effect. And maybe a master of it is a little bit too ambitious, but to be able to surf it, more easily, rather than just being wiped out by it.
One quick thing, which I had a little unexpected intersection between sexuality and spirituality when some years ago I was with a group of gay brothers. We had a weekend together. We were doing some tantric practices. We all got together. We were in a circle. Of course, we didn't have any clothes on. We were in a circle. And in the middle of the circle was a large phallus, and underneath was a support. And we were to breathe in very deeply, and I was just determined to breathe in as deeply as I could. So I did, and I managed to pass out, and as I fell forward, I knocked the phallus off. Underneath was a tin can, which had a very sharp edge on it. So as I fell, like a tree, I was told later, right on top of it, it opened up my whole face. Wow. I woke up instantly when I hit the ground, because blood is gushing out. People are surrounding me. And my first words were, "I'm fine." They said, "Not totally." I said, no. They said, "You're bleeding." I said, "Oh, yes, in the blood section." I said, "I'll get dressed and put clothes on and go to the emergency room." They said, "Not by yourself." And so somebody went with me. And what was fascinating for me is I got to spend the next 5 hours in the Kaiser emergency room. And I felt totally loving towards the doctors who said to me, "Can you wait 5 hours because we want to pay attention to your face?" I said, "Sure." I didn't feel any pain. I loved all the other people around me. I loved the guy who stayed all 5 hours. I loved the doctors who stitched me up. And I thought, well, this isn't what I intended. This wasn't what I was thinking of this morning, but it is what it is.
That's good.
With that complex image. You are having some retreats, some workshops coming up?
Yes, thank you. We have brochures out here, and I apologize that we can't hang out very much because we're picking my sister up at the airport, who's actually there waiting for us. But we're offering a couple of retreats in the next few months. One of them is coming out spiritually, which is based on my book. It's a Friday night through Sunday. And basically it's about helping us embody in a very real, personal, intentional way the spiritual roles and archetypes that gay and bisexual men and queer people that have fulfilled throughout history. And we also do some beautiful processes and exercises about helping to bridge the schism between sex and spirit. The other one is it's called Opening to Breath, Opening to Purpose. It's a day longer, starts on Thursday night, ends on Sunday. And over the course of that weekend, it's all about life purpose and helping us to get clearer and choose or re-choose or commit or recommit to fulfilling that life purpose, to embodying that life purpose. And so over the course of the weekend, you will get 4 rebirthing sessions. And if you've never done rebirthing or cosmic breath work, highly, highly recommend it. In fact, it's one of the great ways to begin to heal past trauma really, really quickly, very effectively. And it heals physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And it can be ecstatic, profoundly ecstatic. Some of the most amazing spiritual experiences I've had have been in that context. And you also get, in addition to the 4 group rebirths, you get a one-on-one hand analysis from Marcus, from my partner. And when we first met, I have to confess that I was a little skeptical about this, because I thought it was palmistry. And I wasn't really interested in knowing how long I was going to live or how many kids I was going to have. And so, but I very quickly discovered that the way he was trained has nothing to do with that. It's not about predicting anything, but it's really the quality and the depth of information that they can provide from looking at our hands is amazing, to the degree that we have incorporated a one-on-one session for every participant over the weekend. And we've also created some beautiful processes and rituals to help us get clear about and to identify any obstacles, what's been holding us back from really expressing our soul purpose or our soul's desire in this life. So we don't have the dates. We do have the dates, but we have to reschedule them. So if you can just grab a brochure, you have our contact information there. And we're happy to speak with you. And thank you so much for having me here and for taking time to
Jack is our host. Any announcements?
So there's tea and cakes out there, and if you have tea, please wash your cup. And there's also copies of the December, January newsletter out there, and a sign-up sheet for the email list to get the newsletter too. And there's also Donable out there, and he's contributed generously to us so that we can keep this going like this. We may have a newsletter coming out in the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks. You said 2 weeks. In 2 weeks. And sometimes people get together after the break afterwards to roll us throughout lunch. So if you're interested, hang around and see what they roll us.
In regards to the newsletters, I was talking to Michael Langdon. Is he here? Oh, yeah. About soliciting from people in Sangha your little anecdotes, maybe as colorful as one Jim rendered. It could be like a journalistic entry into some insight you had, some problem you overcame where you clearly or vaguely applied the Buddhist principles. Primarily because it's not as easy as you think to fill a bi-monthly newsletter. And also, we really do encourage more participation of the Sangha. So that would be one way. If you keep a diary, remember any entries, or if something happens to you during the week, write it down. Or if you're working on an autobiography and you have a segment which you think would be apropos, it'd be really nice, I think. I would love to see an issue with little entries from different people in the Sangha and take the onus off yourself about having to be a teacher or even very good at writing. Just something like that would be something we thought would make good. It would actually be good to make it part of an issue or a whole issue. So be thinking of that.
Roger.
It may seem a long way away, but we have fixed the date for the next Jim. He is not responding as usual, but we're hoping that he will come through as the teacher. If not, we'll try and find somebody else, and if not, I guess it will be me. But it will be a Tibetan center, so there won't be any bird drops as far as I
know. Okay. Let's stand and hold hands.
Will you give us a blessing? Sure. So if you can just close our eyes for a moment. Bring our focus to our breath. Let's begin to follow that breath deeper and deeper inside, just surfing or riding that inhale. Continuing to go deeper and deeper inside. We come to that place inside each one of us, place of center, peace, equanimity, and love. And if we feel the love emanating from our hearts, becoming stronger, denser, thicker, so that it creates a beautiful cocoon of love surrounding each one of us. Becoming stronger and thicker with every breath. So thick, in fact, that as we go back out into the world, it will repel anything that is not of love. Allowing only that which is of love to penetrate. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please Subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.